Helen of Fourgates by Ethel Carnie. Chapter 13. Women and Dogs Go Back. The milk kits, scalding for the next day, were piled outside with the lids off. 100 eggs were ready for washing on the table, just gathered up. Abel Mason's bed had been changed and made. "Are you better?" Helen stood, cup in hand, looking down on the old man. He was coming from one of his intolerable attacks of neuralgia. He glared back at the look on her face. It was scarcely pity, and her query had been put as to any other human being in pain. "Take thy face away from me," he hissed. Then the pain came on again, and she was dabbing the soft heat of the sponge against the nerves, whilst he was tortured with the resemblance to the other Helen, when she had looked softly at him. He repaid her by upsetting the cup over the bed, so that the bedclothes were stained with vinegar. She was slaving night and day now to keep him clean and comfortable. He had half suspected once that Day gave her money to send some of the washing out. A bundle had come in, but Day swore it was old newspapers. Always his suspicions were on the scent now. Almost helpless, she attended him as if he were a baby, he with the heart of a fiend. He had taken to telling Day obscene tales in her presence, to torture her that way. She had an understanding of him lately that maddened him. Her face never showed the disgust of the Pharisee. She tended him, pale and quiet and unemotional, treating his assumed vulgarity as part of his disease. She never spoke of her mother now, to torture him. She bore with him, greatest torture of all. "I want to go to sleep now," he said. She shaded the light by pulling the sheet to throw a shadow on his face. Her hands were bleeding with much washing and the cold winds. His latest torment had been to order Day to crumple clean collars up and trample them to give her more to do. Her voice was trailingly weak at times. She had not quite recovered from the birth of that dead child. He had told Day another child would be a fine plan, but Day had put into him a fear of the death of their victim, with a half suspicion that Day was in love with her. It had become his torment, that thought. He was always watching, fearing, then finding he was wrong. He awoke from a short sleep to see little Aggie trip within the cottage. "Mr. Scott's got pneumonia. He's dying. Mother says, will you come?" she was repeating. "And please, I've got to go back on Jerry's cart if you don't come. Mr. Scott keeps saying, 'Helen.'" Then she turned to Helen. "What's hurt your face?" she asked. "I tumbled, Aggie," Helen said, something palpitating in her voice. It was harder to lie to Aggie than to Fourgates. Abel Mason's fist had done that. It was the greatest insult she had known, because Fourgates could see she had that mysterious thing, a black eye. Day would be suspected of it. To receive a black eye was to lose caste, but what had racked her most was the crushing coil of Day's tenderness. She felt sometimes that she must run away, screaming from his very presence. She was alive now. "Mr. Scott kissed me better when I fell," said Aggie. "Mother says he's going to heaven. Is he?" "I shouldn't wonder. He'll be the fittest there," said Helen. "Isn't heaven a nice place, then?" asked Aggie. "I want you to say this after me, and tell Mr. Scott," said Helen, passing this query. "Mrs. Day is very sorry, but she's too busy to come." Aggie piped the callous answer to that dying plea. "Aye, thou can say it, Aggie," laughed the old man. She started back. "'Flaid of a poor harmless old man like me," he said in a soft voice, but Aggie still shrank. "He's just a poor old man that's poorly, Aggie," said Helen. "Give him a kiss." There was gentle malice in the words. Flesh and blood could not resist some antagonism to the old man at times. Influenced by Helen, whom Aggie held the very gospel of truth, the child pursed her lips and neared the bed, shutting her blue eyes as she went. A devil in hell threatened with a lash of fire could not have looked more evil. Aggie recoiled. "No," said Abel Mason. "I don't like kisses, Aggie. There are sweeter things. Keep thine, and do thy best and worst with 'em some day." Helen was putting on cloak and veil. Twilight was falling, but the black eye was prominent. She had not been down in the village for days. "Field'll kill thee if thou goes," said Mason. He was purple with hopeless rage. "You'll bring another stroke on one of these days," she warned him dutifully. "You needn't fear. I'm not going to Martin. There's one stronger in the field who'll stop me, myself." He heard her getting the hens in. They had piled all the farm work on her too, save for a little help from Amos Tripp, who milked and herded. When she had gone, Mason cursed at Day for his tardiness in coming from Brungerley. It was stock-taking day. Then he consoled himself by planning other tortures for Helen, whilst all the time he was counting the steps Helen made down to the village to put Aggie on Jerry's cart. A step sounded. "Where is she?" he roared. Then his neuralgia came on. "Martin's," he began shouting it out in his agony. "She's gone to that sucking," began the other. There was savage passion in his voice. There was feeling beyond mere power of possession. But when Mason looked at him, he was grinning in the old way. Only the ghost of that fear clutched at the old man again. He spoke of Aggie and Jerry's cart. "There were a child on by herself," breathed Day in relief. "Hell, I didn't want that tranche after the day I've had." The fear died down again in the old man's heart. He knew Day liked comfort. "She took Nero, so she'll not have gone far," said Day. "Not with yon eye. She's proud as Hellcat. She'd ne'er show Martin that, either." Mason laughed and Day grinned. Then they heard Nero clawing the door. "She's gone then," said Day in a still voice. He stood looking at Mason. "I'll get her before she lands," he vowed. "No man's got to trespass on my property." He rushed out. Mason was laughing. He lay through the hours between anguish of fear and rapture at Helen's punishment to come. In his attempts to reach a cup of barley water, it spilled when near his lips. Then he raised that his hated cupbearer might be touching lips with Martin. He turned to plan again, afraid of madness at the thought. Nero's whine of welcome startled him. It was Helen. She entered and poked up firelight on the darkness. She stood by the fire, ashen about the mouth. She was twisting her wedding ring round and round her finger. Day's step made her start, and hers were going too, grinned the old man to himself, going as Martin's had gone, under the long strain. She went to bed soon after. "Got her going through the farm gate," said Day. "Did ta kick her?" asked Mason. "I gave her a knock on t'other eye," Day told him, with his old brutality of loot. "And now I'm going to sleep at just. Martin'll be dead in morning." "He may give a bit more sport yet," said Mason anxiously, "but I'm flayed that he's nearly done." Day took his candle. He came downstairs soon afterwards. "Locked out," he said, and put on his shoes to go to the tool shed. Some minutes later the sound of the splintering of the wood of a door rang through the house. Then all was silent. In the grey dawn, Day came down. "Has she gone out?" he asked. "Eh?" Mason's voice was hoarse. "She's not yon," jerked the boss. As he spoke he was done in jacket and cap. Mason crawled out of bed and looked from the doorway to see him running down the hillside. The trick of Helen to lock Day out and get the door smashed so that the key couldn't be hidden had succeeded. By hedge, dyke and stone wall the boss went straight to Cobblestone's farm. The brightening landscape was a flash before his eyes. He stopped to regain breath and calmness by the white gate. A cock was crowing. He passed up the hill slope. The lamplight came under the white window blind as he neared the farm. He ought to have rushed into the place, but he wanted to know. A jealous crave was in his blood, a mad pulse. He peered under the window blind, getting a full view of the interior. She was there, veiled to hide that blackened flesh, sitting with the calm, hard attitude habitual to her. The lamp was on the table beside her. Martin was laid back on his couch pillow, his eyes closed. From upstairs came Lizzie's sleepy voice. "Shout if he worsens, Helen," she said, "and mak thyself comfortable. Pull thy clothes off, and get a sup of tea." Helen had just arrived, Day guessed, and Lizzie, dead beat, had gone to lie down for an hour, unless Martin was seized by the death struggle. He was in time for the full scene. It seemed an hour of waiting to him before Martin's eyes unclosed. There was a start as his gaze fell on the face of the veiled woman. Day realised that when last he had looked up, it had been to see Lizzie's ruddy countenance. "So thou's come," said the hollow man. He had thawed her, as in the old days. It was significant of the barrier he imagined her coming had broken down. She nodded. Martin's dark eyes were on her veiled face. "Pull that thing off," said the husky voice fretfully. "It's all right," she answered. There was something in her tone he could not understand. It was not coldness or aloofness. It was a sound as of something that came not from the heart but the mind, something calculating, almost mathematical. "How long can't I stop?" he asked. "Till they finish?" The woman turned her head, looking more fully at the ghastly man. "If thou dee's sharp," she said. An agony shot into Martin's face. She had come, but— "I'll do my best," he said sullenly. Then his mood changed. "Let's see thy face, Helen," he begged passionately. "I'll be a long time dead." "They can't," she said, finality in her voice. "Shake this pillow up," he asked. The strategy of despair was in the plea. Shaking his pillow, she must come a little nearer to him, at least. She placed her arm under the pillow, raised him, bending over him, but in such a manner that the helpless man did not even touch her garment, though a whiff of sad, sweet lavender came to him from her bodice. He closed his eyes, sniffing it. Then he said pettishly, "What's to have lavender among thy clothes for?" Perhaps always, down in the dark of the tomb, that maddening smell of lavender would disturb his rest. "Put me back," he asked wearily. There was silence again. "Is there aught thou wants?" asked Helen, with a nurse's interest. "Aye," he answered. "What?" she asked, her glance going towards the table loaded with medicine and nourishment. "A touch of thy lips before the coldness is on mine," he asked. There was sullen despair mingled with a cry of hope in the husky tones. The man under the window made the slightest movement towards the door. Then, as the window stones obscured his vision, he moved back again. "Why should I?" asked Helen. "Thou can't talk like that." The chill respectability of a Foregate's matron was in her voice. "Go away," cried Martin. There was fierce agony in his voice. She rose as to depart. "No," he cried. "No, don't leave me. Oh, this is hell." The last 4 words writhed themselves upon the silence. "Let me sup," he asked presently. "That barley water." She reached the cup to him, her arm under the pillow, and was placing it to his lips. With a supreme effort of flesh and will, his finger, a burning stick of bone and skin, coiled itself round hers. She tried to withdraw it. "Don't," he begged. She did not answer. "I can hear thy heart beating," he said. His eyes were trying to penetrate the veil now. Her face was whiter. He could see that. There were signs that she felt he might gain that heaven, a kiss of hers, before going into the dark. "Art a going to sup this stuff?" she asked in a steady voice. "And let go, or I'll call Lizzie down and say thou'rt rambling." The 2 pairs of eyes met in conflict. The fear in the man's eyes grew. Helen, freeing her finger, set the cup on the table. With a groan of fatigue, Martin's eyes closed. He lay back, very still. He was asleep with the suddenness of weakness. The woman was watching the clock and listening to his breathing. Now that Martin was asleep, she drew nearer to the lamp. Day could see her face, the agony on it, even through the veil. She held the lamp nearer to Martin, to observe changes in his face. Setting it down, he saw her hand pressing to still her heartbeats. She half rose. With her handkerchief she wiped the grey brow of sweat, listening again to the breathing. Then, looking round, fearful that the walls might see her, she pressed the damp handkerchief against her throat and nuddled against it, then slipped it within her bodice. Martin. The man at the window heard this after a long silence. The man she called did not move. She bent nearer, listening to his breathing. "Martin," she said, somewhat louder. There was only silence. The wind rattled the back window somewhat. She was bending close to him now. Day knew what was in her mind. It was in his mind also. Death might have come after that last futile struggle of Martin's to keep her finger within his. Martin Scott. Her lips were close to his ear now. There was a thin note of rising panic in the cry. Then she had hold of him by the shoulders. She was shaking him, and calling in that low, quaking voice of fear, in that flood of absolute terror. He did not move. Day heaved a breath of relief. With a cry full of desolate remorse, she set her lips to Martin's. Their warmth brought him back to consciousness, his eyes unclosed, their dark misery brightening into ecstasy. He saw her, palpitating, wild with passionate grief, surprised her at the moment of her terror. That not dead, she gasped, covered with shame. He clutched at her as she was drawing away from him. "Happen I were," he said, breathing quickly. "Happen thou steered me as I were going. Helen!" The terror of her shamed pride, taken in its fortress, communicated itself to him. His cry on her name was grovelling. "I shall soon be dead," he said. "Forgive me." She had drawn herself free, a tall black figure. Low sobbing breaths came from her. "Oh!" she cried. She burst into convulsive tears. Sinking on her knees, she had drawn his head into the crook of her arm. Unveiled and with eyes of generous tenderness, eyes that might be those of the old Helen's, she was looking down on him. She was kissing him like a wild thing. It was so torrential that Day stood dumbfounded. An avalanche had moved. "I can't stand more joy, Helen," he heard Martin gasp. "It'll kill me, and I want to live." Then the boss rushed at the door and shook it in its sockets. "Who's there?" asked Helen. "Thy husband," he said. "Open this door or I'll batter it down." "Wait a minute," she said. He heard her footsteps draw towards Martin again. She had gone back with her husband at the door, wild with jealousy. After one desperate lunge at the heavy farm door with his fist, he rushed back to the window. Helen had forgotten his existence. She was rubbing her cheek against Martin's as she knelt at his side. "'Twere the seat of Jerry's cart, the tag end o' it swinging away to road led to thee, made me follow," she was saying. "But I didn't think to." Then, "I can't dee now, Martin. Don't go away again." Then with shuddering reproach, "How could ta leave me, Martin?" They were kissing again, kissing like two children after a quarrel. Helen was sobbing and smiling and stroking Martin's face. "What's that wi'?" asked Martin, noticing the blackened flesh suddenly. Then Day's fist crashed through the window. "This is where I come in," said his voice, murderously still in tone. "Now open this door. Tell her to open it, Scott. If that doesn't, I'll swing for her." "Open it, Helen," said Martin's voice. "Let him," she said. "What does it matter?" She was thinking of Martin soon having to die. "Another kiss, then," she breathed in answer to his look. Fielding's hand was ripping at the blind, now bare to his grasp. "It's all right," she said, opening the door suddenly. "Thou can come in." He came in. "I could tear thy pluck out, Scott," he said briefly, "but 'tisn't worth the trouble. There'll be worm fodder inside 24 hours. Then he turned to the woman. "Now," he said, "art thou ready?" There was death in his glance for defiance. Under the boss, the outcast carelessness of life was stirring, the recklessness that he had learnt in the tramp hole, where life did not count. "I'm coming," said the woman who had defied him. There was hidden satisfaction in her tone. She backed towards the door, her eyes on Martin. "Aye," he said, in answer to her look. Day started. No word had been spoken by Helen, but Martin had caught the burning agony of her look, lest he should die. He had smiled hopefully that he would get well, if possible. "If ever she comes again, Scott," said Day, "if there's only 5 minutes to live, I'll end thee." It was his way of barring Helen by fear for Martin. Then Teddy Tripp had thumped down the wooden staircase, one foot coming first all the time. He regarded Day and the window. "What thou's up?" he asked. "Hast to smash my window?" Day tossed half a sovereign down on the table. "Thee harbour my wife at your place till after Scott's stiff," he said, "and thine hasn't a name to cover herself with." "I'll let thee know I'm a respectable woman," shouted Lizzie. "Just wait till I've gotten my stays on." Then she gasped at mentioning her stays. "Come on," said Day brutally, and dragged at Helen. It was full daylight as they got out. The cobblestones struck up into the sky. One stone, almost unnoticed at any other point, stood black and weird, by some strange effect of cloud and sun, taking the curious look of a horned Mephisto, with rigid lines, the sharp chin protruding into and against the heavens, defiant even in death. When the gate banged after them, and the ends fluttered within the coat at the sound, Day turned to Helen. "Give us that rag thou stuffed inside thy bodice," he said. She took it out and gave it to him. Life had a sudden sweetness come into it. Martin still breathed. Who knew? It did not seem that he could die now. Then, across the morning upland, rang Lizzie's voice, sharp with its message. "Helen, Martin's going," she cried. There were two swift opposing movements. Day and Helen were struggling against each other, but the man's grasp was a vice. "Cat," he jerked. She had clawed his face. Her throat was torn by jagged sobs. Day forced her along. Teddy Tripp came running after them. "Lizzie's mista'en, Helen," he panted. "'Twere just a bad bout. We'll let thee know, somehow." He had turned round, and Day's fierce glance fell on his stolid, broad back. "If he lives," said Day, "it's all the same to thee, Helen. If thou takes off with him, I'll find you, and he'll not boast of it longer nor 2 minutes, and 'twould be all the bitterer for thee to lose him then." They went in silence. She knew he spoke the grim truth. If Martin should die now, it would be harder than had he died before she had kissed him, as she thought him gone. If they stole happiness from the altars of the grim gods of their unfortunate destiny, it would be harder still to have the cup shattered at their first draught. When they reached the farm, Day gave a report to Mason, still holding Helen's elbow. "She wants a hiding," said Mason, "and I can't get it to her." Fielding Day took the dog whip from the wall. The rage he had hidden from the farm near the stones, all these silent miles, blazed out of him. Time after time the lash coiled round her. Like an unrepentant dog, she took the punishment sullenly. Only when a faint cry broke from her lips, Day hurled the whip away. "That's it," applauded Mason. Day hurled the whip away. If the stick had beaten himself at his own command, his face could not have been more dour. When Helen had crept away and he fancied the old man asleep, he took something from a drawer, hurling it into the fire. "What's that?" asked Mason, alert from his bed. "Pills," said Day laconically. Mason was dubious. Day poked it out of the fire to show him that wooden box, holding its charred emptiness to him. "Pills," he read on the blackened label. "Aye," he said, his fear subsiding. It was a pill box, but it had held a secret gift Day had bought for Helen out of his own money, from that which he earned himself. The sum he had begun to set apart from the sums doled to him by the old man. It was a trinket such as Four Gates lads would buy their lasses to wear about their necks, Sweat of his had purchased it.